Kia ora koutou katoa. Religion is politics. Bad religion is politics. Good religion is politics. You either work for the love that is justice and or support such workers, or you work for the so-called love that keeps things as they are. The powerful in their place, the poor in their place, and the disturbers of the so-called peace under control. The division between bad religion and good religion cuts through every religious tradition, and all those who think they have no religion. It cuts through labels like conservative, liberal, progressive. It cuts through most churches. For there will be people who, even if they don't profit from the status quo, think it's the best possible system, God ordained even, and injustice just an accident, or something that needs a little bit of tweaking to make right. They like the stability, the security of keeping things as they are. And their God likes things as they are, yesterday, today, and forever. The words love and peace therefore have two meanings. For those who like things as they are, love and peace are personal feelings between people. It's romance, serenity, smiles, kindness, and no conflict. But it's bounded by who you know, who you like, and who you meet when you're out. The other meaning of love and peace is disturbed by the things as they are. It too likes romance, kindness, and concord. But it wants Samaritans, all those who are different, who are our enemies, without giving up their Samaritanness to be included. And it wants people like the woman at the well, story from John 4, who due to having, we guess, multiple husbands, was alone at that well, shunned by her community. It wants people like her included. And included not on terms we, with all our prejudices and often privileges, set, but on just terms, terms of equality and equity, terms of dignity and respect. For the second meaning of love and justice is not just being nice to strangers or enemies or those whose morals aren't what we think they should be. The second meaning of love, instead of wanting things to continue as they are, has a vision of injustices being put right, like race, gender, poverty divisions, being overcome, like justice rolling down like a river, like the freedom of a new heaven and a new earth. For the old so-called heaven and earth have become captive to the mythology of the most powerful. In the 60s and 70s, there was a movement in Germany called Political Evensong. Dorothee Sölle was its most well-known leader. They met in Cologne's St. Anthony's Church, and thousands would attend. The Credo, you can find it on the internet, it's our first reading today, comes from this time. Like most Christian creeds, it's divided into three sections. One about God, one about Jesus, one about Spirit. The God section begins by talking about creation, but what God did not create, namely the structures and systems where the powerful rules and everyone knows their place in this so-called natural order. What God did create, she goes on to say, is the conflict in life as people rebel against this natural order. In that one line, God willed conflict. Dorothy blasphemed against the mythology of love and peace that dominates in Christianity, and inferred that those who liked the current order, with everyone in their place, and the stability of accepting what the powerful tell us, are not doing or following the will of God. 1972, surprise, surprise, her professorship at the University of Mainz was not renewed. Many excuses were offered, including a declaration that this credo was heretical. As one commentator said, the real reasons for Frau Solle's termination is she is too leftist. Frau Solle is critical of the perception of God in which God lords it over human beings. She says that is a God the powerful wish for. Instead of lording it over humans, God is in Jesus. God is in Jesus, who worked to change the status quo and was destroyed, killed, tortured for his efforts. And a God who was in Jesus, who rises again and again in our lives, so that we will be free from prejudice and arrogance, from fear and hate, and carry on Jesus' revolution and make real Jesus' vision of a new heaven and a new earth. New heaven's an interesting concept, because heaven is basically what God is, where God is. So we make where God is new. What Dorothy was encouraging was what she called spiritual resistance to what we so frequently think are the way things just are. Things like war and poverty and discrimination and racism and sexism. How women are treated, how migrants are treated, how children are treated. These are political issues. They're also spiritual issues. For religion is politics and has always been so. We either accept the status quo, sometimes begrudgingly or believing things aren't so bad, or we resist, sometimes in ways that lead to our arrest or other means of punishment, like losing professorships. For Christian resistors, we try to maintain what Brueggemann calls an audacious hope, that justice will come, that we will overcome someday. Václav Havel, the Czech playwright, poet and politician, talks about hope as an ability to work for something because it is the right thing to do, to believe in the potential of our actions, even when everyone else around us says it's hopeless or give up or it's not worth it. While we may never see the fruits of our efforts, we can be, says Havel, like the mystical rose, the rose brave and confident that its beauty can heal the world. It's also very fragile. So to hope is to act, to care is to resist, to pray is to revolt, and we will upset people. There's a glimpse of what we would now call a church at work in Acts 14 verses 19a and 20. Paul had been set upon by a mob in Lystra, stone, heavy rocks thrown at him. They thought he was dead. The followers of Jesus in that place came around and surrounded Paul, and he recovered and then continued on his journey. What we learn from this is that following Jesus is a dangerous business. It annoys people who can win over crowds. For we follow an anti-hero who critiques our usual strong and successful heroes. Jesus honors, restores, and sides with the marginalized. And people get hurt when they follow this resistor Jesus into the public realm of politics. It's a risky business. Then this little story, this pericope, tells us that the church at its best is a community who surrounds its change makers, restores and emboldens them to carry on. It spiritually and physically picks them up and encourages them. So there's a question here for us. Who are the change makers in our midst, in our congregation? Those who sit beside us on Sundays. Who are on the front lines, not only of caring, but to trying to bring about change for people and in structures. What support do they need? How can we encourage them? Be alongside them, if not in body and mind and spirit. Our gospel reading from Luke today is the story of two sisters, Mary and Martha. It's a story, like many in the Bible, that has been deliberately depoliticized. It's a story where the powerful and those who do their wishes have come along and said, this story could be dangerous. We'd better expunge it if we can, or spin it in such a way that it will be harmless, which they did. Only worse, they spun it as a conflict between the sisters. We now know that some Jesus groups in the first 2 centuries broke with the usual ways of patriarchy by forming alternate family structures. It's highly likely that Mary and Martha, along with maybe their brother Lazarus, if he existed, were one such alternate family. No one married, thus no patriarch. The women were the decision makers, the leaders of this household. We also know there was a movement beginning with some groups in the early centuries, but becoming more and more pronounced by the 3rd and 4th century. And remember, the 4th century was when these texts we call the New Testament were brought together. There was a movement for the leadership of women not only to be overlooked, dismissed or discounted, but even to be eradicated from the records. List of 12 disciples and a mythology of the 12 develops and comes to predominate, still around today, all men. Then we get conservatives like the writer of 1 Timothy in the mid-2nd century, and the writer of the insert of 1 Corinthians 14, verses 34 and 35. They even want women to be silenced. All women. Well, this little text from Luke 10 tells us Mary sat at Jesus' feet. This is what a disciple does. This is code for Mary is a disciple, which is not, according to the powerful, what women should be doing or men allowing. According to the rules of politics, the politics that ruled society, it was not right. If this was allowed to go unchallenged, then, heaven forbid, any woman might think she could be a disciple. And if a disciple, a teacher, and a leader, even of men. And then, heaven help us, who would cook and clean and run errands? Oh no, society would collapse. You can read exactly that stuff in the first chapters of the book of Esther. So this needed to be corrected, just like King Ahasuerus had in the book of Exodus. So the spin doctors got to work on this little text from Luke 10. And they placed the words of discouragement and critique on the lips of Mary's sister Martha. It was made into a story of conflict between women. and the patriarchy looked on and smiled. In contrast, a book called The Gospel of Mary, it didn't make the final cut in the 4th century of what to be included. It has Mary Magdalene as a leader, and her leadership challenged by a man in the story, the so-called Great Peter, and then defended by a man, Levi, and Levi's wisdom prevails. We still get one phrase about Mary Magdalene in the New Testament. It's called the apostle to the apostles. But the spinners of this little Luke episode in Luke 10 couldn't get rid of the tradition of Jesus siding with Mary, though. Jesus' words still predominate. Mary is a disciple, so don't diss her. And today we would add, and don't fall into the trap of playing one woman off against another in order to diminish women's ministry. We all have a calling to be hospitable. We all have a calling to learn and to lead. So this little vignette about Mary, Martha, and Jesus, passed down from old, is a political story about political tensions, about the roles of women and men and leadership in the early church. And like in religion, so in society. Mary and Martha were resistors, spiritual resistors, political resistors, trying to hold true to a vision while surviving in a violent, patriarchal world. The decisions then remain the decisions now. You either work for the love that is justice and or support all who stand up, speak out and resist, or you work for the so-called love that keeps things as they are. The included in their place, the excluded in their place, and the disturbers of the status quo under control. It's that simple, really. You choose. Blessings to you this week.